I didn't mean to see her like that, but when our eyes met, she whispered, "Don't leave." And suddenly, everything between us changed. It was one of those evenings where the world outside seemed quieter than usual, the kind of quiet that makes every creak and whisper inside a house feel louder than it should. I had gone over to my friend's apartment just to grab a book he'd promised me, the kind of casual errand that should have been nothing more than that. But the moment I turned the corner toward his bedroom, I realized that nothing about this night would stay ordinary. The door was slightly ajar. I thought it was empty, assumed he'd stepped out, but then I saw her, his sister, moving across the room. She hadn't noticed me yet. I froze, caught in that strange, suspended second where time seems to stretch. The light in the room was soft, spilling from a lamp onto the edges of her face, highlighting her features in a way that made the world outside feel distant. She was changing, but not in a way that was overtly sexual. There was a casual intimacy in the way she moved, the relaxed curve of her shoulders, the gentle brush of her hair against her neck. Then she turned, and our eyes met. That was when everything changed. Her gaze was steady, unflinching, and for a moment I felt every muscle in my body tighten with embarrassment. But there was also something else there, something quiet and vulnerable that I hadn't expected. It wasn't a look of anger or shock, it was recognition. A silent question. "Don't leave," she said, her voice soft, almost a whisper. And the words hung in the air, heavy with something unspoken. I wanted to apologize, to retreat, but the pull of her eyes held me in place. There was a strange warmth in the air, an almost tangible tension that made my chest ache with an unfamiliar, unnameable feeling. The room smelled faintly of her perfume, delicate and floral, and I became acutely aware of the sounds around us. The quiet hum of the lamp, the distant traffic outside, the subtle shift of her weight as she adjusted her stance. It was intimate in a way I wasn't prepared for, yet I couldn't turn away. I felt a strange mixture of guilt and fascination. She was older than me, confident in a way that contrasted sharply with my nervous hesitation, yet her vulnerability in that moment made her feel human, real, accessible, in a way that terrified me. I don't remember exactly how I responded at first, just standing there, caught between leaving and staying. My own heartbeat sounded impossibly loud in my ears, each thump echoing in the quiet space between us. She didn't push me, didn't ask me to step closer, but the way she looked at me, steady, almost daring me to stay, was enough to make me reconsider every instinct I had about what was appropriate. In that suspended moment, everything else faded. The house, the evening, my friend, none of it mattered. All I could focus on was her, the warmth in her eyes, the soft curve of her lips, the quiet insistence in her voice. That single phrase, "Don't leave," became the first thread in a story either of us knew we were about to write. I stayed. I don't even know why. Every rational part of me screamed that I should step back, apologize, retreat, but something in the way she held my gaze made it impossible. She wasn't demanding, and yet, in those quiet words, "Don't leave," there was a pull, a quiet insistence that made me want to stay longer than I should. The air between us felt charged, as if the room itself had shrunk around the two of us. Her presence was intoxicating in a subtle way, the faint warmth radiating from her skin, the soft sway of her hair as she shifted, the quiet hum of her breath. I became acutely aware of every detail, the curve of her shoulders, the way her hand rested lightly against her side, the small, almost imperceptible rise and fall of her chest as she breathed. I cleared my throat awkwardly, trying to fill the silence, but the words felt meaningless. She tilted her head slightly, her eyes never leaving mine, and I felt the weight of her attention like a gentle pressure, a tether I didn't want to pull away from. For the first time, I noticed the subtle elegance in the way she carried herself, confident, poised, yet undeniably human. There was a quiet vulnerability beneath it all, a softness that made my chest tighten. She took a step closer, not enough to invade my space, but enough that I felt her presence more acutely. My heart pounded, and I had to remind myself to breathe. Our proximity was electric without being overt. It wasn't about desire in the conventional sense, but about the awareness of someone noticing you completely, of feeling seen in a way that was both exhilarating and terrifying. I didn't mean to. I started, my voice trailing off. She raised a hand, a small, deliberate gesture that stopped me mid-apology. Shh, she whispered, and that single sound wrapped around me like a soft blanket. Her fingers brushed a stray strand of hair from her face, a movement so natural, so intimate, that I felt a rush of warmth spread from my chest down to my fingertips. There was no pressure, no expectation, only presence. Only connection. We stood there, suspended in that fragile, almost forbidden moment, where the world outside seemed irrelevant. I felt an unfamiliar combination of embarrassment, curiosity, and something else I couldn't name yet. Every glance, every subtle movement, carried a weight I wasn't used to. Her eyes, so steady, so quietly compelling, held mine, and I realized I wanted to stay. Not out of boldness, not out of impulse, but because something about her presence demanded it. I could feel her heartbeat too, I think, or maybe it was just my own echoing in the stillness of the room. I wasn't ready to leave, not yet. I wanted to memorize this moment, the warmth of the light, the subtle scent that clung to her, the way her eyes seemed to ask more than words could say. In that moment, the room was no longer a room. It was a space suspended between hesitation and possibility, between fear and curiosity, and I didn't want to step back. I knew, even then, that nothing between us would ever be simple. And yet, I couldn't move. After that night, things didn't go back to normal. They never could. And yet, we found ourselves in the same spaces again, caught in the gravity of each other's presence without needing words to define it. It was in the small, almost accidental moments that I started to understand her, her quirks, her quiet laughter, the way she moved through a room like she belonged to every corner, and yet carried a sense of gentle restraint. I remember one afternoon when we were sitting together on the worn couch in my friend's living room. I had come to help her move a few boxes, but the work slowed almost immediately as we fell into conversation. She leaned back, one leg tucked under her, the other brushing lightly against mine. I felt a spark at the contact, a fleeting, electric awareness, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was grounding, like a gentle reminder that we were here, in this small bubble of quiet companionship. Her hand rested casually near mine on the armrest, and I caught myself glancing at it more often than I should have. Not because I wanted to touch it, necessarily, but because the way her fingers curled slightly, the soft pressure of her palm against the fabric, felt almost intimate. Each small movement, each glance, carried meaning we weren't speaking aloud yet. We shared a cup of coffee next, sitting at the kitchen counter. Steam curled up between us, mingling with the faint aroma of her perfume. She laughed at something I said, a soft, melodic sound that made the edges of my nervousness blur. She leaned just a little closer to hear me over the hum of the refrigerator, and I noticed the subtle warmth of her shoulder brushing mine. For a moment, the world outside that apartment didn't exist. There was only this, only the quiet tension of proximity, and I felt a strange, thrilling comfort in it. Her eyes kept catching mine, holding them just long enough that I wanted to linger in the gaze, but short enough that it felt natural, unforced. There was no need for words. We both understood that our closeness, our small gestures, were speaking in a language all our own. She reached for a napkin, and our fingers brushed lightly. The touch was fleeting, but it left a warmth in my chest that I carried long after the moment passed. It wasn't about rush or desire, it was about presence. About being allowed into someone's private world and discovering that you wanted to stay. Her age, her confidence, and her calm elegance were contrasted by the vulnerability that flickered in her smile, the way her hand trembled slightly when she laughed too hard at her own joke. I found myself drawn to those contradictions, fascinated by the depths she carried quietly beneath the surface. By the end of that afternoon, I realized something had shifted. The magnetic tension from that accidental encounter hadn't dissipated, it had transformed into something softer, warmer, yet no less compelling. Every small touch, every lingering glance, every shared laugh had begun to weave a thread between us. A thread that felt fragile and precious, but strong enough to make leaving impossible. And I didn't want to leave. It started with a quiet evening, the kind that invites honesty without forcing it. She had invited me over under the pretense of helping her organize some old photographs, but I could tell that wasn't the real reason. There was a softness in her eyes that I hadn't noticed before, a quiet invitation to stay longer, to look closer, not just at her, but at the spaces she rarely shared with anyone. We sat cross-legged on the floor, sifting through boxes of memories. Dust motes floated in the sunlight streaming through the window, catching in her hair and making it shimmer with golden highlights. Her hand brushed mine accidentally, or maybe intentionally, when she handed me a photo, and I felt that familiar warmth spread from my chest to my fingertips. It wasn't desire, not in the overt sense, but a tether of connection that made it impossible to focus on anything else. She paused over a photograph and sighed, her fingers tracing the edges of the paper. I noticed the subtle tremor in her hand, the way her lips pressed together for just a moment before she spoke. "I don't usually share this," she admitted softly. Her voice was quiet but steady, carrying the weight of something deeply personal. "There are parts of my life I keep locked away. I guess I trust you enough to show them." Her confession sent a ripple through me. I wanted to reach out, to offer comfort without words, so I let my hand hover near hers, close enough that she could feel the presence without pressure. She didn't pull away. Instead, she lingered, her fingers brushing lightly against the side of mine. It was such a small gesture, but it carried the kind of intimacy that words often fail to convey. As she spoke, I realized how much I wanted to understand her. The strength she showed to the world contrasted with the quiet vulnerability she revealed in private. She talked about past regrets, about moments she wished she could rewrite, and I listened, captivated not just by her words, but by the trust she was extending. Her eyes met mine frequently, steady and searching, as if she was testing whether I could hold her truth without faltering. The sunlight shifted, painting the room in warm amber tones, and for a fleeting moment, we were suspended in a space that felt entirely separate from the world outside. I felt the subtle brush of her shoulder against mine, the warmth radiating from her presence, and I realized that these small, shared vulnerabilities were more intimate than any grand gesture could ever be. I don't usually let people in," she whispered, almost to herself. "But with you, it feels different." Her hand finally rested over mine, not pressing, just resting. My chest tightened at the simple contact, the trust implicit in the gesture. It was in that moment I understood. Intimacy isn't always about proximity or passion, it's about letting someone see the parts of you that are raw and unguarded, and feeling that they still choose to stay. The older woman I had been drawn to wasn't just confident and graceful, she was human, complex, and quietly fragile in a way that made me want to protect her, to understand her, to be present. By the time the afternoon waned, I realized that our connection had deepened in ways neither of us had anticipated. We weren't rushing. We weren't forcing anything. But in the quiet, in the gentle touches, and in the weight of our shared confidences, something profound had begun to grow. And I knew, without doubt, that it was only the beginning. It was late, later than either of us usually stayed up. I had stopped by to help her with a project, something mundane, organizing papers and sorting books, but as the evening stretched, the room seemed to contract around us, the world outside fading until there was nothing but the soft glow of a single lamp and the quiet hum of a city that had gone to sleep. We were sitting on the floor again, this time side by side, shoulders almost touching. Every small movement carried a weight I wasn't used to. When she leaned slightly to grab a stack of papers, her elbow brushed mine. A spark ran up my arm, nothing overt, just the kind of subtle electricity that makes your chest tighten and your breath catch. She didn't pull away. Instead, she stayed close, her presence quietly insistive, almost daring me to acknowledge it. I could smell her, warm, faintly floral, comforting, and it made the air feel heavier, thicker with possibility. My gaze drifted to her hands, delicate yet strong, moving with practiced ease, and I realized how long I had been watching without noticing. There was something magnetic in the ordinary rhythm of her movements, in the quiet confidence that came from experience, in the small gestures that hinted at her vulnerability. "Do you ever think about us?" I blurted, immediately wishing I could take it back. My voice sounded loud in the silence. She froze, fingers hovering over the papers. Then, slowly, she turned to me, her eyes soft but unwavering. For a moment, nothing was said, and the tension between us became almost tangible. I could feel the pull of her gaze like a physical force, drawing me closer while warning me of the consequences. "I do," she said finally, her voice low, intimate, and almost shy. "But sometimes, I don't know if we should." Her words hung in the air, and I felt a storm of emotions, desire, hesitation, admiration, fear, crash into each other. Every instinct told me to step back, to respect the boundaries of the world outside this room. And yet, every heartbeat, every glance, every subtle brush of her hair against my shoulder told me to stay. To linger. To exist fully in this moment with her. I shifted slightly, just enough that our knees brushed, and the contact sent a warmth spreading through me, making my pulse hammer in my ears. She didn't flinch. Instead, she leaned a fraction closer, the warmth of her body brushing against mine. Our eyes locked, and in that shared gaze, I could see the same conflict mirrored in her expression. The pull of desire, tempered by caution, the unspoken question of whether to take the next step or remain suspended in this delicate tension. It wasn't urgent. It wasn't desperate. It was alive in the quiet, in the shared space, in the electricity of proximity. Every subtle touch, every lingering look, was a conversation of its own. We were aware of boundaries, aware of perception, aware of the age difference, but none of that could erase the undeniable connection pulsing between us. In the stillness, we existed together, fully, if briefly. The tension was a living thing, coiling around us, reminding us that what we were feeling was real, and that, despite all the hesitation, we were both powerless to ignore it. The following evening felt different, charged with the quiet weight of unspoken words. We had planned to meet casually, just a walk, maybe a cup of coffee, but as soon as I stepped into her apartment, the air seemed to hum with anticipation. She was sitting on the edge of the couch, legs tucked under her, flipping through a book with a distracted expression. Yet the moment our eyes met, the distance between us vanished. I took a careful step closer, heart hammering, and she didn't flinch. Instead, she gave me that same steady gaze that had held me captive from the very beginning. There was a subtle shift in her posture, a tiny lean toward me that made my chest ache with longing and caution all at once. "I need to say something," I admitted, my voice low, careful. "Something I haven't been able to put into words." She nodded, attentive but patient, giving me the space to continue. "I care about you," I said, the words simpler than the storm of emotion behind them. "More than I should. I know this, what we feel, is complicated. But I can't pretend it isn't real." For a long moment, she didn't speak. Instead, her hand moved, almost imperceptibly, toward mine. The brush of her fingertips against my skin was electric, grounding, and terrifying all at once. I swallowed, aware of every subtle shift in her expression, every flicker of emotion behind her calm exterior. Then she spoke softly, but with a certainty that surprised me. "I feel it too." Her hand rested over mine, not pressing, just covering, and I could feel the warmth radiating from her. "I've felt it since that night, since you stayed. I didn't know how to say it, or even if I should. But I do." The relief was immediate, a weight lifting from both of us. I reached slightly, brushing a stray strand of hair from her face, and the warmth of her skin against my fingertips made the world outside irrelevant. She leaned into the touch, not fully, just enough that our connection was undeniable. We stayed like that for a long while, no need for words, only presence. The soft glow of the lamp highlighted her features, the subtle grace in the curve of her smile, the quiet vulnerability that had always been there beneath her confident exterior. I realized then that our feelings weren't impulsive, they were a recognition of something real, built from moments of trust, shared laughter, and quiet proximity. "Complicated doesn't mean wrong," she whispered, her voice a comforting tremor. "It just is." I nodded, feeling the truth of it resonate deep within me. The age difference, the social perception, All of it mattered, but it didn't define the connection we had cultivated. Her hand tightened over mine, a silent affirmation. I felt my pulse slow, the tension of the past days melting into something warm, safe, and entirely ours. In that small gesture, we both acknowledged our desire, our care, and our readiness to explore it, slowly, thoughtfully, respectfully. That night, we didn't rush, didn't overstep. We simply existed together, hands lightly touching, eyes locked, hearts quietly acknowledging the bond we had chosen to nurture. And for the first time since that accidental encounter, I felt a profound sense of peace. We had crossed the threshold from tension into understanding, from hesitation into acceptance, and the world, complicated as it was, felt a little softer, a little warmer. The evening after our confession, the air between us felt different, lighter, yet charged with a quiet, enduring intimacy. We didn't need words to fill the space. Every glance, every movement, was already a conversation in itself. She had prepared tea, and the soft aroma of chamomile and honey lingered in the room, mingling with the faint warmth of the lamp. We sat on the couch together, closer than before. Her shoulder brushed mine, not in a hurried or flirtatious way, but with a comforting weight that anchored me. I could feel the subtle warmth radiating from her, the quiet steadiness in her breathing, the way her hand rested near mine, almost brushing against it with each shift. Each small touch carried the unspoken reassurance of care and presence, the kind that only grows from trust. "I'm glad you stayed," she murmured, her voice soft and intimate, eyes meeting mine with a quiet certainty. There was no hesitation now, no tension, only warmth and honesty. I smiled, feeling the heaviness of previous days melt away. "Me too," I whispered, my fingers inching closer to hers until our hands finally met, fingertips entwining naturally. The simplicity of that touch was extraordinary. It wasn't dramatic or urgent, it was quiet, safe, and infinitely meaningful. I felt the pulse of her hand against mine, the gentle pressure that spoke volumes more than words ever could. She leaned slightly into me, her cheek brushing against my shoulder, and I could feel the subtle rhythm of her heartbeat, steady and reassuring. We laughed quietly over memories from our earlier encounters, small moments that had once been tinged with tension now transformed into shared stories of connection. Her laughter was soft, melodic, and each time it reached my ears, it wrapped around me like a warm embrace. I found myself studying the little details, the way her hair fell across her face, the calm confidence in her posture, the tender vulnerability that surfaced when she smiled fully, letting me see her completely. Time seemed to stretch, but neither of us minded. We existed in the moment, content to simply share space, warmth, and the quiet intimacy that had grown between us. Her hand remained in mine, thumb brushing lightly over my skin, a silent affirmation of the bond we had nurtured. I rested my forehead gently against hers, feeling the same mix of excitement and comfort that had drawn me to her from the very beginning. "This feels right," I whispered. She nodded, a small, serene smile curving her lips, and for the first time, everything felt settled. Our connection, once filled with tension and hesitation, had matured into a gentle, undeniable love, a slow burn that didn't need grand gestures to prove itself. We lingered like that for hours, talking softly, sharing small touches, and simply being together. The world outside could wait. Inside this room, age, expectations, and social perception had no power over the intimacy we had created. It was a moment of emotional and romantic harmony, a quiet affirmation that love, patient, respectful, and deep, could flourish when given the space to grow. When I finally left that night, our hands reluctantly parted, but the warmth lingered in me. The subtle glances, the gentle touches, and the steady, unspoken understanding had changed everything. And I knew, without doubt, that this was only the beginning of something enduring, slow, tender, and beautifully ours.